We're reviewing all the Awaken Mode tanks that I own every day for the month of October, and we're halfway through them now. Today we're looking at yet another variant version of a tank, but this time it's substantially different unlike tanks we've previously covered. This tank is the Tier 8 German Premium Medium, the Wraith Panzer 58, which is a variant of the Panzer 58 Mutz. It has a 9cm or 90mm gun, and this gun has been buffed twice within the year, I believe. It was a 240 alpha gun in the past that got buffed to 280 when they initially buffed a few 88mm to 280 for the Germans a while ago. And then recently they went and turned almost all the rest of the 88mm to 280 and then decided to buff the Mutz and the Wraith to 300 alpha damage each time they increased this tank's DPM while they were at it. With 300 alpha damage and an 8.3 second reload, the Wraith has a base DPM value of 2169. Already we're at a difference between the two tanks, with the Mutz having a 0.1 second better reload time, giving it just a slightly better DPM. But this above 2100 DPM is insanely good. It's among the highest for its class and tier, and definitely stands out as a harder hitting tank with DPM too. As for its ammunition, it is the exact same as the Mutz, with their 212 standard AP penetration with a good 1000 shell speed, and their 259 premium APCR penetration with a very good 1250 shell speed. The premium rounds aren't anything special for this tier, and fighting tier 10s with no hate rounds can be rough as you're fighting with almost average tier 10 standard pen with those premium rounds, but of course it's enough to make things work. Good luck against super heavies though, hopefully you don't have to fight them. As for the gun handling for this vehicle, it does share 10 degrees of gun depression with the Mutz, as well as their 1.9 seconds of aim time, but it does slightly differ with the accuracy. The Wraith has a slightly worse accuracy of 0.33 to the Mutz's 0.32, which isn't too big of a difference to really care about in my opinion, and 0.33 is very good to begin with and above average for its grouping. That 10 degrees of depression, however, is not something to just gloss over. It's truly amazing. Any tank that has this much depression is extremely flexible in many positions, and it just feels super nice to have. It allows for less risky poking and more angling of your armor. And if you know the Mutz, revealing as little of yourself as possible is super helpful, as that thing is quite thin. But the Wraith differs heavily in the armor profile as well. And that's because of all this spaced armor plating they have on the tank. Admittedly, the Mutz has some good angles, as you can see with the rounded frontal hull and turret face, but the thicknesses were never enough to make the Mutz feel like a head armor to rely on to begin with. But with all this 25mm spaced armor on the upper plate, upper sides, and turret cheeks, as well as 35mm of spaced armor on the upper mantlet, it turns this rounded and decently thick shapes into decent armor that can get you to eat up shots way more consistently. Still not putting you in heavy tank territory where you want to get shot at, but when you do, the likelihood of a ricochet or non-pen is much higher with this tank, and it's definitely noticeable in game. The spaced armor even goes around the whole back end, and this isn't going to get you bounce shots on the rear, but what it is going to do is make you way less susceptible to HE damage, which honestly is the biggest upside here. If you're struggling to pen this tank, it does have 40mm cupolas and a 30mm driver's hatch to go through as well. This tank also differs from the Mutz with having more HP at 1500 HP rather than 1400. Remember how I said this tank was buffed to 280 alpha damage in the past? When they did that, they buffed the Mutz to 1400 HP, but left this one behind at 1300 because of the spaced armor. And I felt that was a bit lame and made this tank feel worse in comparison despite the armor difference. And when they buffed them again to 300 alpha damage, they buffed this one's HP, but not to match the Mutz, but instead overtake it by 100, which now allows this tank to brawl way more effectively with not only spaced armor, but HP to trade with. The spaced armor feels like a big upgrade armor-wise over the Mutz, right? But that's of course not without its drawbacks for having that armor. The obvious drawback to the added weight would be its mobility. This tank goes only 44 kilometers an hour forward to the Mutz's 50, which is definitely a significant speed decrease and made more noticeable with the power to weight ratio difference. With the 600 horsepower engine they share, the Wraith only has a 13.45 power to weight ratio, which doesn't even break the 15 power to weight I usually look for what I consider to be a mobile medium. The Mutz does though at 17.09, which is a huge difference, That added space armor makes this tank much heavier and takes a big hit to its mobility for it. At least the differences in traverse speeds aren't too bad with this tank's 46 track traverse to the Mutz's 50. The obvious trade-off is that this is meant for more rough combat and being able to take hits, which is why having more HP is super nice to have, and I'm glad they gave this tank that HP, while the Mutz is more of an evasive tank with the thinner armor. You might think that the camo would take a hit too, right? And it does, but not by too much. This isn't a skinned version of the Mutz, it's a variant of the Mutz, meaning it does still need camo to be applied to the vehicle. So without the camo applied, like all the previous monster tanks, you can compare the camos 1 to 1. And its still concealment is less than 1 meter's difference, with its 335.98 to the Mutz's 335.19. But it does take a bigger hit, although not by much, in the moving concealment, with 363.24 to the Mutz's 359.68. So honestly, not that big of a camo hit at all, still allowing this thing to be virtually just as stealthy as the Mutz, just without the speed to relocate as easily. They do both share the same 380 meters view range, which isn't the best, with there being many other tier 8 mediums with 390 or even 400 meter view ranges. That's made up for with the better camo than most of those tanks, meaning its leeway range between its camo and max view range is still good in that regard. It just can't spot as far or eat away at camo as good as others. Honestly, the Wraith was a variant of the Mutz I didn't bother to care for before, but after giving it the 100 better HP than the Mutz, that was enough for me to finally enjoy the tank, seemingly enough. The speed differences are extremely noticeable, but what isn't is the camo and gun handling differences. They're there, but they're not something you can really say kills the tank for you in comparison to the Mutz. Having slightly less accuracy in DPM is made up for with the way better armor and HP to block and trade with. I love my Mutz, and this variant of the Mutz got me to love it too. I was really surprised to see it be made into a 300 alpha tank, and when they did so, it got even more DPM, but it's just so nice and I can't deny it. I was fine with 280 though, it made me feel it wasn't necessary personally. But another reason to love this tank is of course because it gets to play in the Awakened event mode, right? So when this tank awakens within the mode, its ability is that it has lifesteal. It's a normal tank otherwise, but every bit of damage it does, it returns that in healing to the tank. And it's a 1-to-1 ratio of damage to healing. And this sounds strong, but if I remember correctly, it's ultimately not, because it doesn't do that much damage, and I never see Wraiths last too long in the mode. It sounds nice, and you may enjoy it, but there are other more fun and stronger tanks than this one. I am looking forward to trying this one again in the mode though, and seeing how long I can last in battles, but again, I don't remember Wraiths being all too good. And you can see we try this tank out among all the others we'll be reviewing on Halloween here on a YouTube livestream. This is a tank available from the limited Monster Hunter op we got this year. So do I recommend it? Yes I do, and quite highly. Of the 8 tanks, we've gone over the 2 light tanks already, and they're just pure reskins. This one is a different take on the Mutz, which is one of my favorite tier 8 mediums in the game personally. And this variant of the Mutz is quite strong. Its Awakened mode ability is not the most fun and interesting from the 8 tanks available, but it's by far one of the best of the 8 tanks in standard play to choose from. Even if you have the Mutz, it plays differently enough to warrant having another Mutz in your garage, unlike most of the others. With all that said, it's gameplay time. As for my loadout, I'm running optics, rammer, and vents for my equipment. For my consumables, I have a premium repair kit, food rations, and a standard med kit. And my commander is running 6 Sense, rapid loading, steady aim, born leader, snapshot, run and gun, situational awareness, camo expertise, and silent driving. And here we are on Vineyards. Now this is quite a long game, and that's because, well, it gets down to the wire near the end. But we're going to make things work in the Wraith here. Now, usually going south is kind of reserved for more heavy tanks, and you might think I could go that way with my space armor and HP, but you still, like we said, have virtually the same camo, and you obviously have the same view range. So even with the slower speeds and the better armor, you can still play this thing like a Mutz. And that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go this way. But instead of sitting back with these tank destroyers like I would with a Mutz, I'm kind of going to play more forward. So you do have differences in your initial play styles with this one compared to the Mutz. And I think that's just one reason why I love this tank so much, is that it's a variant of a tank that I already love that allows me to do something different. So it doesn't just feel like a straight carbon copy. And this tank's already been featured on the channel after its second buff to its alpha damage. And we had a good game in that one, but we're going to have a better one here. When that buff came out, I played this tank a lot. And then, obviously, with my idea here of reviewing every tank for Awaken mode, we had to play this tank again quite a bit. I don't remember how many games it took me here, unlike the Holland Hound, which was the last tank we reviewed. That one, I believe, was my first game in the tank, and we had a great one. I don't believe this was my first. It definitely wasn't. I don't know if it was my third, though, but it didn't take long to get it, is how I remember it going. Now, although we have 10 degrees of gun depression here, going up that slope isn't a good idea, but look what we get to do. We get to fight this T-29 while he's trying to go hold down. You see his gun's not too far down either. Now, we are low rolling. With 300 alpha damage, if we've hit 3 shots, you would expect 900 damage roughly, right? And we have less than 100. Or sorry, more than 100 less than that, right? So, a bit rough starting off, and you can never tell in this game anymore who's running damage reduction equipment. But it doesn't matter, because we're just gonna do as much damage as we can, constantly hit this T-29, and even get block damage. Look at that. We have 1500 HP, we haven't taken any damage, and we already have 640 block damage. 2 320 alpha rounds have bounced our turret face. Now, the turret face is where there's less spaced armor in comparison to the hull, but it still works, obviously. And it really is, like, quite interesting how much that spaced armor is a difference maker. Especially against lower tier tanks, it's going to have more of an effect on their lower penetration values than it is higher tier tanks. Now here we make an aggressive play because I realize that we can. We bounce the cupola of a AMX AC. Unbelievable, but there's another block damage shot, and we do it again! So we decide to side scrape and go for the lower plate instead. We get a tracking round off, though. Much like the Holland Hound review, I said in there that with the difference in trying to get games for a review purpose, right? Trying to get a high base XP game instead of trying to mark. It really is funny how it opens up this care to go for both track and spotting damage. Whereas if I was trying to mark a vehicle, if I got spotting damage, I would usually stick with it. And I would guarantee myself damage shooting another tank, rather than trying to track him. Because, yes, you could still get, like, assisted from it, but I don't want to have two kinds of assistants fighting for each other to be taken as my marking one. So, in these games, I do try my best to get tracking damage. And we were lucky enough to get tracking damage with that AMX AC. Now again, if you don't know, the reason I say all that is because with marks it only takes your highest 2 from your assisted. But while I was yapping about that, we've done 3,400 damage, we've gotten 2 kills. It's 7 to 8, more than 4 minutes into the match. And we did take a big hit from this SU-130 PM, but we have 652 HP left. If we didn't get that buff, we would have 452 HP left, and we would be able to be one-shot by the SU. But we're not anymore. And it's differences like that, it's little interactions like that that make this tank, honestly, a good variant. But before, when it had low HP, because they're like, oh, you have spaced armor, so you shouldn't have that much HP to trade with, it was kind of dumb. Because I feel like HP is all about, like, weight and identity. And usually tanks that have to brawl, you don't want to rely on armor as much as you want to rely on trades. Although, I shouldn't even say that, but, like, trading is more effective than relying on armor with premium spam in the game, right? If I have the HP to trade with, it's much better, in my opinion. Not for every tank, though, obviously, right? Now, though, despite all that being said, we now are one shot to an SU-130PM. But guess what? That spaced armor, man. We got super lucky with that spaced armor in our side shot there. I didn't see if he shot a heat round, but I presume he did because it got eaten up. And that allows us to live. If we were in a Mutz, we'd be dead. 5149 damage now. It's 3 to 4. We have 471 HP. Again, if we didn't have the HP buff, we'd have 271, which would put us to be one shot by 300 alpha tanks or higher. We've done 500 assisted damage, so not too much, but we've blocked more damage than we have HP. And that's always something nice to do in tanks with armor, or even tanks that you don't think have too much armor. That was a extremely delayed shot. We're gonna pretend that one didn't happen. But bouncing more HP than you have, or bouncing more damage than you have HP, is a good sign that a tank has good armor, right? Now, this KV-4 is bullying my teammate, and I have failed to support him. But finally, I get a shot into him. Now this G-Sword is running up on us. We would be one shot to the G-Sword if it weren't for that HP upgrade. I'm going to keep pointing these situations out. We now have to take 2 hits from the G-Sword because of it. Now, if we were in a Mutz, right, we would have 371 HP. So it would sort of be the same thing. We have to take 2 hits from a G-Sword. But it's just that extra 100 HP and the fact that it's no longer 1300 that makes it good. Because ignore comparing it to the Mutz for a moment. The HP buff was 200, right? We went from 1300 to 200. Or sorry, 1300 to 1500, right? So it's a big HP. Now, a Borsig shows up out of nowhere. We missed our 2 shots on him, but luckily the other guy who's close by is a one-shot Scorpion who just gives it to me. So now we're at above 6,000 damage, 4 kills, and there's a full health Borsig in front of us. Now, is Cone gonna load those HE rounds that he has? Probably not, because I'm not gonna lie, Cone probably forgot he had HE rounds to begin with. Very rarely do I take HE rounds, and even if I do, I mostly forget that I have them. But I'm worried about this Borsig, but it's a 1 versus 2 now, and we have the 2. It was just a moment ago a 2 versus 4, where it looked like my friend here was gonna die to the G-Sword and the KV-4. I put a round into the KV-4 finally after 3 hits, and that was enough to allow him to take it out in 1 hit. And the G-Sword I put a round into, and he was able to take it out after that too. He's pushing the Borsig, who thought he would try and get a shot around the other side of the mound, and luckily we're gonna hit this shot here. Putting us at 6675 damage. Well done to the Patriot. We performed under pressure in a 2 versus 4 scenario, and we came out on top with a insanely good 2354 base XP for 6,675 damage and 4 kills. Like I said, if you saw my video on the Mutz after its buff, this is a better game. That's the Mutz for you, right? 300 alpha damage is insanely strong. It is a 90mm, and the Indian Panzer also got the same buff if you're not aware, and I believe it does have better DPM. But the Mutz is a phenomenal tank. I love that thing to death, and so having a variant that, yes, it's slower, yes, it doesn't have the power to weight ratio either, but it has virtually the same gun and camo and more HP. It turns the identity of the tank into a lightly armored, sneaky, evasive tank into one that can put its foot down and get block damage. And we got a significant amount of block damage in that game too. So I highly recommend the Wraith. If you're thinking about, if you don't have the Mutz, definitely get the Wraith. If you do have the Mutz, you can think about getting other tanks if you don't have the other ones. But the Mutz or the Wraith here is a must-have in my opinion. Thank you for watching this video. I'll see you in the next one, and take care.